If you're a lineman in charge of keeping the lights on, Grainger understands that you go to great lengths, and sometimes heights, to ensure the power is always flowing. Which is why you can count on Grainger for professional-grade products and next-day delivery, so you have everything you need to get the job done. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Hey there, this is Alexis Knight. Welcome to True Crime, the Court of Public Opinion. I'm your host, guiding you through cases that have moved through the courts and reached a conclusion, but left the public divided. These aren't your typical cut-and-dried cases. These are the ones where the facts may be clear, but the truth? Well, that's another story. In this episode, we're going to dive into one of the most high-profile and controversial cases in recent history, the Jeffrey Epstein case. This is not just any case. As you probably know, it's a story of immense wealth, powerful connections, and shocking allegations of abuse. Epstein's life and actions pulled back the curtain on a network of influence that most people could hardly imagine. But it's his suspicious death in 2019 that took this case from a criminal investigation to a full-blown public debate. Now imagine this. You are a part of an investigation uncovering years of alleged abuse. And just as it seems that justice might finally catch up with a man who evaded it for decades, he is found dead in his jail cell. A convenient end, some might say. An end that leaves questions, suspicions, and a sense of unfinished justice. As we go through this case today, we will uncover the details of Epstein's life, his crimes, and the powerful connections that allowed him to operate unchecked for so long. Was his death an escape from accountability, or a failure of the system? Stick with me to find out more about this case that left so many people asking, can justice really be served when power and privilege are at play? Jeffrey Epstein was a man who built his life around secrecy, wealth, and influence. For years, he was able to avoid serious legal repercussions, despite mounting allegations of abuse from countless young women and girls. His connections reached the highest levels of society: politicians, celebrities, business moguls. It all created a shield that protected him from accountability, at least for a time. He held all those people's lives in their hands. Of course, they would never come forward and they would protect him. But now fast forward to 2019, after all of this has been set up and so much has happened, the walls finally begin to close in. Epstein's arrested on federal charges relating to sex trafficking, and for the first time, it looked like the legal system might actually catch up with him. The media erupted, and public opinion was as heated as ever. People wanted answers, and it seemed the world was finally going to see Epstein answer for his alleged crimes. Yet just weeks after his arrest, Epstein was found dead in his Manhattan jail cell, sparking one of the most intense public debates in recent history. Was it suicide, as the official report suggested, or was it something far more sinister? That single event transformed a criminal case into a conspiracy that reached beyond Epstein himself. For those who had hoped to see him brought to justice, his death felt like a denial of accountability, a case cut short, with critical questions left unanswered. And as the public processed the shocking news, many began questioning if Epstein's powerful connections had somehow intervened to silence him. With his wealth and influence, Epstein's life was a mystery, in many ways, even in death. He left the world questioning what was real. In the end, the court case never reached a final verdict, and many aspects of Epstein's life and his death remain in the shadows. Today, we're here to dissect this case from every angle. We're going to delve into the facts, explore the legal and ethical arguments, and dig into the reasons why so many people felt justice was left undone. Was his death truly an act of desperation, or did someone stand to gain by silencing him for good? Because here, in the court of public opinion, you're the one who decides if the scales of justice balanced out. So stick with me as we take a closer look at Jeffrey Epstein, a man whose life and death left a trail of questions, a legacy of pain, and countless lives forever impacted. Together, we'll uncover what we know, question what we don't, and ask the ultimate question. Was justice truly served, or was this a failure to hold one of the world's most powerful men accountable? As we dive into the Jeffrey Epstein case, it's impossible to ignore the disconnect between what was seen publicly and what was happening behind closed doors. And it's only fair to the true crime court of public opinion, that's you guys, to go over all this stuff. The public, if they're going to have an opinion, deserve to have the facts to make an opinion on. But this case, it played out like a dark mystery where the audience, that's us guys, the public, is left in the dark, trying to piece together the truth from fragments, while those in power hold the rest of the puzzle. Epstein's life was shrouded in secrecy, even as disturbing allegations surfaced year after year. He mingled with powerful figures, moved through elite circles in a way that seemed untouchable, almost invincible. To the public, it was clear there was more happening than met the eye, yet the details, what was really going on, all of that remained hidden. Then, in 2019, the arrest came, and suddenly it seemed like justice might finally catch up with him. The public was captivated, thinking they'd see accountability for the countless victims who waited years to be heard. But before the trial could reveal the truth, Epstein was found dead in his cell. The public outrage was immediate. Many felt this wasn't just the end of Epstein's story. It was a betrayal of justice itself. How could the man at the center of such a massive investigation simply die in custody? And here's where the controversy grows. Official reports labeled his death as a suicide, but almost instantly, conspiracy theories began circulating. For many, it seemed too convenient that Epstein would escape judgment this way. With the long reach of his connections and the power he wielded, people began questioning if there was more at work behind the scenes. Were there people out there who did not want Epstein to speak, who feared what might come out if he testified? Now we're left with questions that have no easy answers. Was Epstein's death truly an accident or suicide? Or was it a deliberate move to keep his secrets buried? How did someone so heavily monitored still manage to die under these mysterious circumstances? And perhaps most hauntingly, what does this say about the power structures that seem to operate beyond the reach of the law? As we piece through the events today, think about how this case was presented to the public, what we were shown, and what might have actually been concealed. This case may have been closed legally, but in the court of public opinion, as most of you probably know, this one is far from over. So as you listen, consider this. Are we truly getting the full story? Or is there more hidden in the shadows than we will ever know? Epstein's death and the mystery around it created a media firestorm, with news outlets, social media, and independent investigators all digging for answers. To the public, it felt as though Epstein's story was an unfinished one, a tale that went to trial but somehow never reached its natural conclusion. Major news networks aired countless specials and documentaries, while internet forums were flooded with theories, speculations, and suspicions about who might have had a motive to see Epstein silenced. The public frustration was palpable. For Epstein's victims, his death felt like another layer of injustice. They had come forward, some for the very first time, in the hopes of facing him in court, of seeing him be held accountable, only to lose that chance abruptly. And for the public, it raised uncomfortable questions about the legal system and the forces that could potentially influence it. Was this truly a case of suicide, or were strings being pulled behind the scenes? In the end, we're left with a story that refuses to settle. The unanswered questions and lingering suspicions around Epstein's death have kept this case alive in the public consciousness, with new information and theories surfacing regularly. The powerful figures in Epstein's circle, his life of secrecy, and the timing of his death all leave us wondering, will we ever know the full story? Don't we deserve that? As we examine the details of this case, I invite you to keep these questions in mind. In the court of public opinion, facts don't always reveal themselves clearly, and justice can sometimes feel out of reach. So let's explore the twists and the turns and the unanswered questions surrounding Jeffrey Epstein's life and death. And by the end, it's up to you to decide if justice was truly served, or if this case has left us with more shadows than answered. And consider this: if public opinion is always considered, could there be a possibility it is also being used as an extended finger of justice? And if so, is limited information that forms your opinion fair to you? To understand the Jeffrey Epstein case, we have to start by looking at the man himself, a financier and socialite who, despite his enormous wealth, kept an unusually low profile. Epstein built a mysterious empire, leveraging his financial acumen and powerful connections to move in elite circles, securing friendships with influential figures, from CEOs to world leaders. His life seemed to defy scrutiny, shrouded in secrecy and obscured by his associations with the rich and powerful. Jeffrey Epstein's life began in an ordinary way, but his trajectory would lead him to immense wealth and connections that most people can only imagine. Born in 1953 in Brooklyn, New York, Epstein grew up in a modest, working-class family. He was academically gifted and began his professional journey teaching at an elite private school in Manhattan. Remarkably, Epstein held this position despite not having a college degree, an early sign of his persuasive charm and ability to open doors that might seem closed to others. Epstein's shift from education to finance marked the beginning of his ascent into high society. He joined Bear Stearns, a prominent investment bank, in the 70s and quickly made a name for himself as a resourceful and ambitious young financier. Epstein climbed the corporate ladder, securing wealthy clients and learning the intricacies of high-stakes financial management. However, his time at Bear Stearns was cut short amid allegations of regulatory misconduct, which forced him to leave the firm. Undeterred, though, Epstein took his skills and connections and eventually founded his own financial management company. By the 80s and 90s, Epstein had established himself as a private financier who catered exclusively to billionaires, creating a highly secretive client base. His business model was unusual. He reportedly refused to handle clients worth less than $1 billion. This exclusivity not only increased his wealth, but also solidified his reputation within elite circles. Epstein began to cultivate relationships with influential figures, including the politicians and celebrities and royalty. These connections granted him access to powerful social networks and afforded him an aura of mystery that seemed to protect him from scrutiny. With his wealth came an extravagant lifestyle. Epstein acquired properties around the world that were nothing short of opulent. He owned a private island in the U.S. Virgin Islands, an expansive ranch in New Mexico, a mansion in Palm Beach, Florida, and one of the largest private residences in Manhattan. These properties became well known for hosting lavish gatherings attended by his influential friends, creating an image of Epstein as a mysterious but charismatic billionaire. Publicly, he was seen as a man who had everything: a financial empire, exclusive connections, and a lifestyle of luxury. However, beneath this glamorous facade, there were dark secrets. Epstein's wealth and influence masked a disturbing reality that would gradually come to light in the years that followed. Rumors about his relationships with young women and underage girls began to circulate, yet they were largely dismissed or even ignored. It seemed that Epstein's powerful connections provided him with a protective shield, allowing him to continue his lifestyle without any interference. It was only in the early 2000s that these rumors began to attract serious attention. Whispers about Epstein's interactions with young women began to reach law enforcement, sparking curiosity and concern. For a man so well connected and wealthy, these allegations posed a potential threat to his carefully crafted image. But despite the initial suspicions, it would still take years before any formal action was taken. The full extent of his alleged activities was not yet known, and Epstein continued to move within these elite circles, seemingly unaffected by the growing murmur of allegations. The first wave of rumors, however, was just the beginning. What would unfold over the next 2 decades would reveal a complex web of influence, secrecy, and alleged exploitation that implicated not only Epstein, but those within his powerful network. As Epstein's wealth and influence grew, so did the cloud of suspicion around him, a cloud that would eventually draw the attention of law enforcement and the public. As Epstein's wealth and reputation continued to grow, so did the whispers about his interactions with young women and girls. These rumors would eventually catch the attention of law enforcement, and in 2005, the Palm Beach Police Department received a disturbing report from the parents of a 14-year-old girl. The girl claimed that she had been taken to Epstein's Palm Beach mansion, where she was allegedly paid to give him a massage that escalated into abuse. This initial report prompted an investigation that would soon reveal a troubling pattern. Multiple young girls, many of them minors, reported similar experiences of being recruited and paid to perform massages that often led to more. As police delved deeper, they found a network of recruiters, often young women themselves, who allegedly sought out vulnerable girls from nearby schools and communities to bring to Epstein's residence. For many of these girls, the promise of money was enticing, especially given that many came from difficult backgrounds. But once inside Epstein's mansion, they were reportedly subjected to exploitation and abuse. The scale of the allegations was shocking, and law enforcement began to build a case they hoped would finally bring Epstein to justice. In 2006, following the months of investigation, the Palm Beach Police Department recommended felony charges for Epstein, including unlawful sexual activity with minors. However, what followed was a series of legal maneuvers that would ultimately result in one of the most controversial plea deals in recent history. Rather than face federal charges, Epstein's legal team negotiated a deal with the U.S. Attorney's Office in Miami, which allowed him to plead guilty to 2 lesser charges of soliciting prostitution, one of which involved a minor. In exchange, Epstein received an incredibly lenient sentence, 13 months in county jail, with the unusual privilege of work release, allowing him to leave the facility for up to 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. The details of this plea agreement were sealed, and many of Epstein's alleged victims were not informed of this arrangement until after it was finalized. For those who had hoped to see Epstein held accountable, the plea deal was a devastating blow. The fact that he had received such a light sentence, especially given the gravity of the allegations, fueled widespread public outrage. Many questioned how someone accused of such serious crimes could receive what seemed like a slap on the wrist. Speculation grew that Epstein's wealth and powerful connections had influenced the legal process, allowing him to avoid the full consequences of his actions. This plea deal, known as a non-prosecution agreement, effectively ended the federal investigation and granted immunity to any potential co-conspirators named in the case. Highly unusual provision that only added to the public's suspicion. To this day, the 2008 plea deal remains a focal point in discussions about Epstein, with many viewing it as a symbol of the ways in which wealth and influence can distort the justice system. Despite the leniency of his sentence, Epstein's reputation began to suffer. The public was becoming more aware of these allegations, and some of his high-profile connections started to distance themselves. Yet even after serving his 13-month sentence, Epstein largely returned to a life of luxury and privilege. His properties continued to host gatherings, and he maintained a certain level of status within elite circles. It seemed to many as though Epstein had managed to escape the consequences once again, shielded by the very network that had enabled his behavior. For the victims, however, the plea deal was a painful reminder of a lost chance for justice. Many felt that the system had failed them and that Epstein's powerful connections had once again allowed him to evade true accountability. The agreement, in effect, silenced their voices in a court of law and limited any further legal action against him at the time. Now, in the years that followed, Epstein managed to rebuild aspects of his life and maintain a low public profile. He continued to host events at his private properties and maintained contact with influential individuals. Yet the shadows of his past lingered, and whispers about his behavior did not all fade away. As more survivors privately shared their experiences, an informal network of stories began to form, painting a fuller picture of his alleged activities and hinting at a disturbing pattern that extended beyond the 2008 case. This period of relative quiet came to an end in 2018 when the Miami Herald published an explosive investigative series called Perversion of Justice. This series scrutinized Epstein's 2008 plea deal, revealing the extent of the accusations against him and shedding light on the stories of multiple survivors who felt their voices had been silenced. The publication of these reports reignited public interest in the case, leading to renewed scrutiny of Epstein's connections and the legal mechanisms that had seemingly shielded him from more severe consequences. The Miami Herald series sparked a wave of outrage and demands for accountability. Many questioned how Epstein had been able to secure such lenient treatment and speculated about who might have been complicit in allowing his alleged crimes to go unpunished. Public pressure began to build, prompting federal authorities to reopen their investigation into Epstein's activities. This time, with the public spotlight firmly on the case, the calls for justice grew louder than ever. In July of 2019, Epstein was arrested once again, this time on federal charges of sex trafficking of minors and conspiracy to commit sex trafficking. The arrest was a significant moment for his survivors who had waited more than a decade to see the legal system take substantial action. Prosecutors in the Southern District of New York laid out a detailed case, alleging that Epstein had not only continued his exploitation of young girls, but had operated a vast network designed to recruit, groom, and exploit them across state and international lines. Following Epstein's 2019 arrest, the public anticipated that this high-profile case would finally reveal the extent of his alleged activities and potentially implicate others in his network. As authorities searched his Manhattan townhouse, they uncovered additional evidence, including photographs and documents that seemed to corroborate the testimonies of survivors. Epstein's arrest was seen as a breakthrough moment, especially for his accusers, who had fought for years to see him brought to justice. It appeared that this time the investigation would proceed without the influence of his powerful connections. However, Epstein's time in custody was short-lived. On August 10th of 2019, just over 1 month after his arrest, he's found dead in his jail cell at the Metropolitan Correctional Center in New York. His death was officially ruled a suicide by hanging, but the circumstances surrounding it raised immediate questions and public suspicion. Reports revealed that 2 guards tasked with monitoring him had fallen asleep. They both fell asleep and failed to conduct their scheduled checks. Additionally, cameras outside Epstein's cell were reportedly malfunctioning at the time of his death. So for a very high-profile prisoner, how much attention was being paid to this, if this all was really going on? Sleeping, cameras that don't work, hey, who cares? These lapses in protocol, combined with the high-profile nature of the case, led to widespread speculation that Epstein's death might have been orchestrated to prevent him from testifying. This does happen, but it's hard for people to believe, and you kind of feel guilty when you think it. But Epstein's sudden death effectively closed the criminal case against him, leaving many of his accusers devastated, and the public was outraged. To them, it felt as though Epstein had once again evaded justice, this time in a final and irreversible way. His death robbed survivors of the opportunity to confront him in court, and it left lingering questions about his associates and the broader network that had allegedly enabled his actions for so many years. The controversy surrounding Epstein's death prompted an investigation by the Department of Justice, focusing on the failures in monitoring and protocols at the correctional facility. In the ensuing months, the 2 guards responsible for checking on Epstein were charged with falsifying records, as they had reportedly neglected their duties the night of his death. While the official ruling of suicide was upheld, these revelations only added to the public's suspicion and dissatisfaction, fueling conspiracy theories and casting doubt on whether the full truth about Epstein's life and connections would ever come to light. Epstein's death marked the end of the criminal proceedings against him, but it was far from the end of the story. Survivors continued to pursue justice through civil lawsuits filed against his estate, seeking compensation and a measure of accountability. These lawsuits provided a new avenue for uncovering details about Epstein's network and potentially implicating those who had helped facilitate or cover up his alleged crimes. As the lawsuits progressed, they kept Epstein's actions in the spotlight and forced a continued examination of his relationships with prominent figures. The legal and societal fallout extended beyond Epstein himself, drawing attention to the institutions and individuals who had maintained ties with him despite the allegations. Universities, foundations, public figures associated with Epstein faced increased scrutiny. Some institutions chose to return donations or publicly distance themselves from his legacy, while others grappled with the repercussions of their connections to him. The case underscored how deeply Epstein had embedded himself within influential networks and raised questions about the broader implications of his associations. In 2021, Ghislaine Maxwell, Epstein's close associate, was convicted of multiple charges related to sex trafficking and exploitation of minors. Her trial shed further light on Epstein's operations, revealing details about his methods of control and the role Maxwell allegedly played in facilitating his abuse. Maxwell's conviction provided a sense of closure for some survivors and further exposed the disturbing dynamics within Epstein's circle. However, even with this outcome, many questions remained unanswered, leaving the public and survivors alike to wonder if the full truth would ever be revealed. Epstein's case has since become emblematic of the intersection between wealth, privilege, and the justice system. His life, actions, and the events following his death highlight the ways in which influence can shape outcomes within legal and societal structures. For many, Epstein's case remains an unsettling reminder of the potential for powerful individuals to evade accountability, raising important questions about the protections available to the vulnerable and the limitations of justice when faced with such concentrated influence. Though the criminal case ended with Epstein's death, the broader implications of his actions and connections continue to shape public discourse and legal reforms. His survivors and the public are left with an unsettling legacy of secrets and unanswered questions, underscoring the importance of transparency, accountability, and vigilance in pursuing justice, no matter how powerful the individuals involved. Okay, let's move forward. Now, with this case, I am taking a slightly different approach because this isn't just about what facts happened at trial. This is about diving deep into the layers of influence, hidden connections, and shocking revelations that set this case apart. Epstein's story remains an extraordinary example of how wealth, power, and secrecy can distort justice, and many of the details that surfaced stunned the public. So in the next little bit here, I'm going to examine the complex world Epstein navigated, the behind-the-scenes dynamics that protected him for years, and the anger that grew as these facts came to light. This is part of the story where every detail matters, facts that you may not have heard before, connections that explain how he stayed above the law for so long, and questions that are still unanswered. So listen closely as we peel back the layers of this case, taking you behind the scenes now and into the world that Epstein lived in. Why is this case unique? So, the Epstein story could have faded into obscurity in all this time if it hadn't been for the unique turn of events in 2018, and that was the Miami Herald's in-depth investigation. Very bold. At this point, many knew the bare bones of Epstein's 2008 plea deal, but few really understood the scope of his alleged activities or the lives that he had affected. What set the Miami Herald apart was its focus on the survivors themselves, giving voice to those who had long been silenced or ignored. Julie K. Brown's series titled Perversion of Justice, it wasn't just a retelling of Epstein's crimes. This brought forward the voices of survivors who had been minors at the time of the alleged abuse, some as young as 14, and allowed them to tell their stories in their own words. Again, very bold, very brave. For the first time, readers could hear directly from these young women. Epstein was no longer a distant figure with a criminal record. He became a real, tangible threat with real victims, and he had left a trail of devastation. Beyond the survivors, the Herald also revealed new details about the non-prosecution agreement that had shielded Epstein and his potential co-conspirators. This part of the plea deal had been largely hidden from public view. That's you and me, and its implications were shocking, but we didn't get to know. Well, people were appalled to learn that Epstein's deal not only minimized his own punishment, but it also seemed to protect others who may have played a role in this whole operation. The secrecy of this agreement fueled more suspicion and raised a critical question. Why had the justice system protected someone with such a disturbing history, especially when so many young lives had been affected? This investigation was also unique in that it didn't come from a major national outlet with all these endless resources. The Miami Herald was a regional newspaper with a dedicated investigative team that went up against some of the most powerful figures in America. Brown's persistence and commitment to uncovering the truth resonated with the readers who felt that this was a case of real journalism, standing up to privilege and influence, something we do not see very often these days. The series' impact was amplified by social media, where readers shared the survivors' stories and expressed outrage and demanded justice. Now, the timing of all this was also crucial because the Me Too movement had recently emerged, empowering survivors of abuse and shining a light on how powerful figures often escape accountability. Epstein was no longer just a footnote in criminal history. He was now at the center of a national conversation about privilege, accountability, and the exploitation of vulnerable people. This wasn't just media coverage. This was an unearthing of truths that had been buried, a challenge to the systems that had protected Epstein, and a public demand for answers. And as we continue here, let's explore the powerful network that allowed Epstein to thrive for so long, and how these connections shielded him from accountability in ways most people could never imagine. I mean, Jeffrey Epstein wasn't just a wealthy financier. He was a man who cultivated connections with some of the most powerful and influential figures in society. His network spanned political leaders, business moguls, celebrities, and even royalty. An elite circle that gave him both status and protection. This network of connections served as a powerful shield, deflecting attention from his alleged activities, and in some cases, possibly deterring authorities from even pursuing investigations as rigorously as they might have otherwise. One of the most troubling aspects of Epstein's connections was how seamlessly he moved within these circles, often blurring the lines between business and personal relationships. He was known to host lavish gatherings at his private properties, including his mansion in New York, his ranch in New Mexico, and his private island in the U.S. Virgin Islands, where influential guests were treated to luxurious accommodations and exclusive events. These gatherings helped Epstein build a public image of success and charm, which concealed his alleged predatory behavior from many in his social circle. Some of his guests, though, may have seen a different side, with rumors hinting at troubling behavior behind the scenes. A notable figure in Epstein's life was Prince Andrew. You probably couldn't miss that one. He's a member of the British royal family whose association with Epstein attracted immense public scrutiny. Photos of Prince Andrew with Epstein and one of Epstein's accusers fueled speculation and furthered the belief that Epstein's connections reached far beyond what was publicly known. The prince's connection to Epstein highlighted a critical question. Were Epstein's relationships based solely on wealth and influence, or were some individuals aware of the darker aspects of his life? Prince Andrew's later statements, distancing himself from Epstein, well, that only added to public suspicions and raised questions about how many others in Epstein's network may have similarly chosen to overlook or ignore his behavior, participate in some of the events. Epstein's connections also extended deeply into the worlds of business and finance, with friendships that included prominent figures like Les Wexner, the billionaire founder of L Brands and Victoria's Secret. Wexner's close relationship with Epstein granted Epstein unprecedented control over aspects of Wexner's finances and his properties. For years, Epstein acted as Wexner's personal financial advisor and reportedly gained access to funds and assets worth millions. This unusual level of access and influence provided Epstein with both wealth and credibility, solidifying his position as a trusted figure in elite circles. However, Wexner later stated he severed ties with Epstein after learning about his alleged activities, highlighting yet another instance where Epstein's connections helped him until they no longer served him. And then there was Epstein's connections to academic and scientific institutions. Epstein presented himself as a patron of science, donating millions to universities and research initiatives, and aligning himself with respected academics. This cultivated image of philanthropy that allowed him to secure friendships with influential intellectuals and scientists, and even renowned institutions like Harvard. For some of these individuals and institutions, Epstein's financial support overshadowed the darker rumors about his private life, creating an environment in which his donations and connections, they all just went unquestioned. By positioning himself as a benefactor, Epstein protected himself from scrutiny within academic circles that might have otherwise been more critical of his character and background. These relationships were not only a testament to Epstein's influence, but also a chilling reminder of how wealth and connections can protect individuals from accountability. He created a network and an environment in which his alleged crimes were downplayed or dismissed, often because people felt they had too much to lose if they were to cut ties with him. The mystery surrounding Epstein's activity at his properties, the access granted to his high-profile guests, and the lack of intervention from those around him painted a picture of an elite world that operates by its own rules. And what makes Epstein's network even more troubling is the role it played in silencing its accusers. Many survivors reported that they felt intimidated by Epstein's influence, and they feared that no one would believe their stories, or that they might face retaliation if they came forward. Epstein's connections extended to lawyers and politicians, even law enforcement, creating a sense that he was in many ways untouchable. The perception that he could evade consequences due to his network discouraged others from coming forward and speaking up, and it left survivors feeling isolated and powerless. Jeffrey Epstein's connections were among the wealthiest and most powerful figures in society, a network that acted as a protective shield for years. Among the most scrutinized of Epstein's connections was Prince Andrew, whose friendship with Epstein brought significant public attention. Photos of the prince with Epstein and one of his accusers fueled speculation about how much Andrew and others knew about Epstein's private life. While Andrew distanced himself later, his link to Epstein highlighted the unique protection that these high-profile connections did offer Epstein. His financial relationships also helped secure his status. Prince Andrew was in the public eye, but it was his entire network that maintained his protection for years. Epstein had it, and this is a powerful reminder of how influence can distort accountability. Only when media scrutiny intensified did his carefully constructed world begin to unravel, exposing the mechanisms of power that had kept him insulated. And let's not forget the public, because the victims are in the public, and they were getting louder. So is the media the hero here, or is it the victims? Without them, this case would have had no traction. Without them, think of how this would be continuing. How many victims could there be, or are there in total? We can never be sure how many victims were out there, but we can thank the brave ones that came forward, bringing light to this complete atrocity. Now, in July of 2019, on July 6th, Epstein is arrested on federal charges of sex trafficking of minors and conspiracy to engage in sex trafficking. So as everyone's, coming off of the 4th of July, he's arrested. I'm sure he had a big 4th of July celebration with all of his independence to do what he wants. Well, this arrest for many did seem like justice. It was finally catching up to him. But as I said, it was just over a month later that he's found dead in his jail cell at the Metropolitan Correction Center in New York City. His death officially ruled a suicide, but the circumstances surrounding it quickly fueled widespread suspicion and outrage. So you have a system that allowed him to get away with this for so long, and when he's finally in custody, they turn away, and we don't know what else happened. We technically don't know at all what happened. But this is what this is supposed to be for us. And the victims in the end have absolutely no justice for all that he had done. Yes, the Justice Department launched an investigation, but yes, they upheld the suicide ruling. Public stayed skeptical as well, and Epstein's death only deepened frustration with the justice system. And for his accusers, this was another crushing blow, robbing them of that chance to see him face justice in court. It left many survivors feeling that justice had once again been denied, and it further fueled a sense that Epstein's powerful network might never be fully exposed. Because if Epstein couldn't take care of something to stop all of this, maybe someone else could. But at the end of the day, the public, some in the public believe, some of the victims believe, that without this power and influence of powerful people, justice just might have been served here. But the public is divided. Here we've walked through the layers of the Jeffrey Epstein case, and each detail is more disturbing than the last, really. This isn't just a story about a man. This is a story about a system that allowed a man to operate unchecked, about powerful people who seemed to look the other way, and about survivors whose voices went unheard for far too long. What happened here was not just a failure in justice. This was a betrayal of trust on a massive scale, a reality that's upsetting and haunting and difficult to comprehend. Epstein's network, the suspicious plea deal, the renewed investigation, and finally his untimely death have left us with more questions than answers. This is a case that challenges our faith in the systems designed to protect us. How could so many allegations and so much suffering be hidden in plain sight? Why were there so many lapses? And who ultimately benefited from his silence? Even with all we know, there are layers that remain concealed. I think we all know this. It leaves survivors and the public wondering if the truth will ever be fully revealed, and it leaves us all wondering what else is out there, doesn't it? As we reflect on the complex and deeply unsettling nature of this case, we are left with tough questions. Is it even possible for someone with Epstein's wealth and influence to face justice in the same way an ordinary person would? What is justice? How many people protected by privilege are able to evade accountability for things they have done and are doing today? And what message does it send to survivors and the public when a man like Epstein escapes justice? Not once, but twice. First through a lenient plea deal, and then through his death in custody. And if we think, well, it just ends there, he killed himself, let's just try to imagine if he did not. Do you believe he would have been sentenced like someone else for this? Do you think this would have drug on until there were so many loopholes it fizzled away? I mean, we may never get all the answers to this, but we can't ignore the questions that this case has raised. The anger and frustration of survivors and advocates who echo loudly, and they're calling for change, for accountability, for a world where no one is above the law. So as we close this one podcast episode, there are questions I leave with you. How was justice served in this case? Was it truly served in the case of Jeffrey Epstein? Or is this yet another example of how influence and wealth can buy not only freedom, but silence? How far are we willing to go to demand a justice system that protects the vulnerable over the powerful? It's kind of a scary question just to even think about, isn't it? But these questions need to be asked, and I'm asking you. Can you commit to a choice on what you think about this? Thank you for joining me in this episode of True Crime, the Court of Public Opinion, Jeffrey Epstein. This has been a look at a case that is far from resolved, a story that remains deeply unsettling, and a reminder of the importance of seeking truth, no matter how disturbing it may be. Stay safe out there, guys. Stay curious and keep asking the questions, no matter how disturbing they are. And until next time, this is Alexis Knight.